Hi, everyone. Here I am, ready for my first class with Graehme, and he's going to walk me through the ins and outs of the guitar, a little bit of history of it, how we've gotten to this point, and some of the special features. And I'm looking forward to learning all of these things because obviously it's an instrument that I'm very unfamiliar with. And maybe you'll learn something about it too, or maybe you already know all of this, but I think it's going to be fun. And one thing I wanted to mention while we're at it, because Graehme has a very special spelling to his name, and I thought maybe I'd ask him to spell it so we all know what it is.
Okay, so it's Graehme. So for those of you who may not be familiar with that spelling, that's actually a Gaelic spelling.
Yeah. Nice spelling, by the way. I love Gaelic names. So
Thank you.
All right. So I'm ready, Graehme, whenever you are.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for the warm welcome and introduction, Amy. So yes, of course, I am Graehme. My name is Graehme Floyd. I am a guitarist. I'm also a guitar teacher and a business owner here in London, Ontario, Canada. And for those of you who may not have seen the initial video, our introduction video on this kind of series that we've started with Amy, I first met Amy along with my business partners, Carl Sloman and Tice Burrows. And what we're doing now is we are going through the individual instruments that are really the primary instruments within rock music and looking at each of them individually, just so that Amy can learn a little bit more about what they are and how they work and really what their roles are within rock music. So of course, as you can see...
Because for me, of course, all these instruments are... all three of these, whether it's the drums or the guitar or even the synthesizer. I mean, okay, I'm passingly familiar with a synthesizer keyboard, but I'm a pianist where all my training is built around the acoustic instruments, and guitar, I mean, harp also is a plucked string instrument like the guitar, but the instrument that my specialty is built around is not electronic either. And so all of these amplified, modified, and electric sounds are not my realm of expertise at all. And, well, you might be interested to find out that we do have electric harps. And I actually know several harpists who have electric harps, but I've never spent a lot of time on them because they live in other parts of the world. So even though I'm acquainted with them, I've never actually had the opportunity to sit down and try the instrument and see what it does. But I have these vague understandings of the basic ideas of what you can do with amplification and all of that. But the guitar, especially the electric guitar, is essentially a foreign instrument to me. So that's just a bit of why I'm here wanting to learn about it.
Wonderful. Yeah, and the world of electric instrumentation or even just electric amplification really is a very, very deep well of possibilities. And I believe, especially on the guitar side, this is really why rock music, as this very broad, diverse genre, came about. It was the ability to now explore electric amplification of an instrument that before that was fairly limited and even especially in an ensemble setting was relegated quite far back into the band as a support instrument. So let's
didn't have the volume to project with any significance.
Absolutely, yeah, and that was really where I wanted to touch on is really this idea of the evolution of the guitar itself, and really what led to the early stages of rock music. As a guitarist, this is a really important thing for me, is understanding where this instrument came from, what kind of changes and development it's gone through, and how we've arrived at these kind of iconic designs and combinations of technology that we use and expect to see today. So,
And I think I can totally get excited about that because remember, I grew up in a family, and my father is a piano technician, and he's built a harpsichord. He's built harps.
that's
I don't
really
think
cool.
he's ever built a piano, but he's restored pianos. And my grandfather also was a piano technician and restored pianos. So I can get really, really excited and into the technical elements and the developments and the intricacies of what it is that makes an instrument unique.
Absolutely. I think the most important thing to touch on, because we have a limited amount of time to introduce some of this information, both to you, Amy, and to your audience, if this is new to them, is to talk about some of the most important changes that have happened to this instrument that led to really the formation of rock, and of course rock's evolution from the early days. So just as a quick introduction, I'll kind of switch over here just for a second. I have another guitar just sitting to the side, which I'll grab. This is an example of a style of electric guitar. This is also an electric guitar. And you can usually tell an electric guitar versus a standard acoustic guitar from these devices, which we call pickups, that are mounted on usually underneath the strings in the body of the guitar. And what's significant about these is that they are really what, as the name implies, picks up the sound of the strings, converts it into a signal that we can then send to an amplifier, and then do all of the fun things we guitar players do to create our sounds. Now, what is important to understand, or one of the biggest changes about an instrument like this, is that this is a hollow body instrument, which is not unlike our typical acoustic guitar. The inside of the body is a hollow resonating chamber, which allows the sound of the strings to be naturally amplified to create more sound. But this poses a little bit of a problem for rock musicians, rock guitarists, and that is, we like volume, we like sound, we like loud, especially when we have to combat the volume of our drummer, who is behind us or next to us or wherever they are on stage. So as we turn the volume up on our amplifiers, an instrument like this, which has this hollow resonating chamber, has a tendency to produce feedback, that usually high-pitched frequency, which is horrible and loud and unpleasant. But unfortunately, again, this thing is almost designed to create that high-frequency feedback sound. So
I see, right.
Yeah, in and around the late 1940s, early 50s, there was this change that came about in the design of guitars, and I'll switch back to another electric, where we went from an instrument that had this hollow resonating chamber to an instrument that is essentially solid piece of wood. So we eliminate the acoustic possibility of feedback. Now in the process, we do lose out on some of that resonance, that kind of open, airy character. But of course, what we gain is the ability to be a lot louder. We also gain, you'll excuse the pun, gain, which is this ability to drive up the sound and create that nasty, rough, buzzy sound of our electric rock guitar. So that's probably one of the biggest changes that we see in this evolution from the early electric guitars into the solid body electric guitar.
Okay. So just a funny little question.
Sure.
With a solid body guitar, of course, then it's not designed to function without being connected to pickups, right? Because it doesn't have the resonating chamber. It can't really create much sound on its own.
That's correct. Yeah, it's kind of
Does it?
dull and lifeless
What
without
does
it.
it sound like? Yeah, like it doesn't have a soundboard that's really designed to create any sort of big sound, right?
No, yeah, and in fact,
If it's
quite
just a block of wood.
yeah, it's a block of wood with metal and strings and this, the electronics, if they're not plugged in, that are kind of in
Okay.
the way. Um, I actually there's another style of early electric guitar which is sometimes referred to as a cutting board with strings, because it really is quite that simple in terms of how it's
Huh.
put together. Unfortunately, I don't have an example here to show today, but yes, the instrument, the electric guitar, as an instrument, really is incomplete without the amplifier. It is half an instrument, and really doesn't
Okay.
serve as much of a purpose. Now, as soon as we have the two together, we have this synergy between the actual played instrument and the electronic equipment that supports it that creates this brand new world of possibilities. Mostly because we can now take that sound that was originally limited in terms of amplification just to the physical instrument, and we can get into the world of electronic change. We can dial in sounds. We can sweep out frequencies or sweep in frequencies. We can add in this distortion character in all sorts of different levels of maybe subtle
I
nuance or
see.
extreme, what sometimes we call the the angry bees sound.
Right, right,
And we
okay.
can add all sorts of other sounds as well. In fact, there's an entire kind of subculture in electric guitar playing which specializes in looking at little devices like these, which are called effects pedals. We add these into the chain of electronics that we use, and we can create sounds that range from, again, these simple distortion or overdrive types of sounds to massive kind of cathedral and kind of anthemic, atmospheric types of sounds, and just about everything in between.
Okay. Interesting. So it's actually a whole orchestra of sounds within this block of wood.
Absolutely, yeah,
Or at least
and
or at least coming
the
out of this block
possibility
of wood.
exists. Yes, well, and it is right. It's really not that complex of an instrument in terms of the design, especially when we compare it to certain orchestral instruments. When you're talking about the complexity of, say, the design of a violin and how it amplifies,
Right,
and
right.
it's built in such a way. The
All
interesting
the science of resonance and amplification and everything that you get into to try to create the ultimate violin.
yes.
So then here's another question. If it's just a solid block of wood, does it matter whether it's wood or some other material?
That is a really good question. And I know that no matter what I say, we're going to have people in the comments who are going to say, no, it's not that, it's this, it's the opposite. There's quite a bit of debate along the ideas of, does it make a difference what kind of material, or even specifically what kind of wood, is used to craft the instrument? Now, over the course of my time learning about the guitar and kind of just seeing what's out there, I've seen an unbelievable number of different materials used to create guitars. Everything from, of course, your typical varieties of wood. This is an instrument that would be made from specifically mahogany, mostly because supposedly it creates this really nice mid-range sound in the guitar.
I see.
But lately, we have, again, a whole community that's built around creating guitars out of the most unusual of materials. Everything from, synthetic or, acrylic type materials, but even using things like pencil crayons and gluing them together and then
Okay.
shaping it into an electric guitar and attaching materials. And when you listen
Fun.
to the final product, there's certainly some subtle differences. But the nice thing about the electric guitar is you aren't limited in terms of what the instrument itself produces. You can then, of course, go to the electronic
I see.
side
Right,
and
right.
shape sounds to whatever it is that you would like. So Let's now take a look, because you mentioned the idea that, hidden within this instrument, within the possibilities, is almost this kind of whole orchestra of sounds. And I think it's really interesting you mentioned that, because the role of the guitar really kind of falls into that category as well. With most of the other instruments that we see in rock music, whether you're talking about the vocalist, or you're talking about the drummer, or you're talking about the bass guitar player, the role that those instruments fall under are fairly clear. The drummer is the rhythm player. The bass player is that low register. And of course, you have this kind of harmony or chord support side that it delivers as well. The voice is melody. The electric guitar is a little harder to pin down. It really is the jack of all trades when it comes to its role in a band.
Okay.
At any moment in a piece of music, even within a single piece of music, you may switch as a guitar player from rhythm. You may switch into more of a harmonic role where you're outlining chords and working with the bass player. Or you may switch into something that's really more of a melody or a counter melody to work with your vocalist, or maybe to stand out on your own in our iconic guitar solo, right? We have this view of the guitar hero, the soloist, which has become really part and parcel of the idea of rock music when it comes to the electric guitar.
Yes, well, my audience on YouTube let me know that pretty quickly. And some of the earliest pieces that I was listening to, I was just stopping at any point to say what I was thinking, and they were saying, "You cannot stop in the middle of a guitar solo. That's heresy. That's the greatest insult." And
certainly, yes, especially
like,
of course to the guitar players.
I was just listening and commenting. Yeah.
Yes,
I think I still do it sometimes, because so many interesting things happen in that solo
absolutely.
moment, and so there's so much to talk about, and sometimes I'm like, I can't wait to the end, or I'll forget all of the stuff that's running through my mind right now.
That's
so
right.
I do.
Our typical guitar solo really isn't that long. Maybe 30 seconds at most, but there is this attempt at trying to fill that space with as much to say as possible. Right. That's the guitarist's moment, and they're gonna take advantage of it as much as they possibly can.
I see.
So on that side, again, talking about roles, I thought it might be interesting for your audience, but also for yourself, to give you some examples of some of these types of parts or roles demonstrated on the guitar in isolation, where we don't necessarily have to hear it in the context of the music. You don't have to filter it out with all of the other instruments. So I mentioned before, one of the roles that we will often play as guitar players is a rhythmic or support kind of with rhythm with the drummer. And there's a particular type of technique that we hear guitar players use quite a lot. And I'll kind of touch on this a little bit later about some of the kind of compositional stuff that comes in. But we have a tendency, especially with distortion, which can be really loud and somewhat chaotic and wild, we will actually control the instrument by using contact of the strings to dampen the sounds of the strings and create a very percussive type of sound.
I see.
So we can really emphasize rhythm. We can still, of course, support that with a bit of harmony, usually in very, very simple chords. We're talking really from a theoretical standpoint, things that we wouldn't really even think of as chords. We're really just talking about an interval of a fifth, right? Our guitar power chord.
Okay, right.
All right. Now that'll get used in a variety of different ways. This is all kind of coming together in rock music with a slang term or a name that we refer to as a riff. Now, I don't know, is that something that through this journey you've been going through, is that something that's come up yet, the concept of the guitar riff or a riff at all?
Right. So when I first listened to my first few pieces, I was identifying musical features by the language that I knew, which included motif and ostinato and let's see, there was another one. But anyway, theme
Yep.
or something like that. And I was using those words to describe, and then people kept commenting and saying it's called a riff, it's called a riff, it's called a riff. I'm like, what's a riff? And I gradually started to figure out that there's this certain type of pattern that's repeated. It's kind of a cross between let's say, a rhythmic ostinato and a melodic motif, but it seems like it doesn't really get developed or explored in very often in the way that I would expect a motif to be exploited in your typical classical context. So in that way, it functions more as an ostinato type thing, with a little bit of variety or creativity thrown in. And then somebody just recently commented and said, riff is short for rhythmic figure. And
Okay.
I don't know if that's true or not, but it kind of clicked in my mind. I'm like, okay, it's a rhythmic figure that maybe it has some melody to it too, because it's obviously the guitar is not just a rhythm instrument, but it has that rhythmic element really built into it. That's about the sum total of my knowledge of a riff at this point.
Yeah, and I think you've got a lot of really good points in thinking about it that way. As guitar players, the idea of riff, and this is definitely a slang term. I know that there are times where other instrumentalists in rock will kind of use this term, but riffs for the guitar and in rock music, most rock music, as you said, are not really truly developed the way they would be in art music. We really present the idea, that's what it is, and we play it over and over and over again. And if I had to give an example of, what is the quintessential rock guitar riff, it would be. And I don't know
Okay.
whether or not that's familiar to you. That is from Smoke on the Water by Deep Purple. And
Okay.
for me, as a
Haven't listened to them yet.
okay, that's okay. Maybe something
Yet.
to check out down the road. A little bit of homework, perhaps.
Uh huh.
That stands out to me not only because when I think about a riff, that's what comes to mind, but as a teacher and but also still a student of the instrument, that is essentially the very first riff that every guitar player learns. It is
I see.
relatively simple. It's not very difficult to play on the instrument once you get the idea. It's very, very repetitive, and it's also very catchy. It's something that sticks in the mind. It
Yep.
gets played over and over and over, almost to the point. And of course, there's a running joke about how in music shops, when people are going to check out instruments they might be interested in buying, the staff there, of course, is don't play that riff, don't play Smoke on the Water. There's a bunch of other ones that are like that. It's just too many people play it, so they don't want to hear it. Right?
It's like, how many students do I have come walking in to my studio saying, "Yeah, I can play a little bit of piano," and they start with the opening 7 notes of Fiori Lisa, and
Right.
then I'm like, right, I understand where we are. Let's get down to work.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, you certainly get a solid sense of that. But again, even though it's maybe overplayed, it is definitely, as I said, that quintessential sound. It encompasses almost everything that we would expect from a great guitar riff. Not to say that there aren't others that might fill that space as well, but I think that's the one for most of us in this rock genre that we go to as the archetype, right? That's the example
Okay.
that fills that.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so that riff idea is not something that is unique to the guitar, and in fact, it really points back to the lineage of rock music and rock guitar playing, which is coming from the blues. You would have an idea like that that's introduced for a piece, and in a blues tune, you might have the entire song that's filled by that one idea played over and over again. In rock,
Okay.
we tend to have a little bit more diversity in what we play, but it's not necessarily this idea of theme and variation that you may have in art music. It's just
And it seems to be more of like one, and then a little bit later switching to something different, or you might hear
Yes.
one in the intro, and then just before the intro is over, it switches to something else, which goes for the verses of what's being sung or whatever,
Yes.
and then maybe a little later something else is brought in, and of course they all have to fit with the general mood or vibe of the music, but they don't. I haven't been able to find anything that really makes it like feel like they're supposed to build one off of the other. It's more like we're switching so that we don't get bored, or so that to keep some sort of dynamic. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but
You know what?
that's what I've come up with so far.
Again, I think you're on the right track with this. I think that part of the composition in writing with rock music is about trying to make sure that things don't get boring. Sometimes when you have
Because
an
there
idea,
is a lot of just outright repetition,
yes,
right?
absolutely. And especially on the guitar, it's as you become comfortable on the instrument, of course, it becomes easy to jump around to a variety of different things. How I tend to think about composition or the organization of music within a lot of rock tunes is that we will think about the riffs, and in some cases, maybe a progression of sorts that's built into that riff. And it's kind of dropped into different sections that are occurring. So if you have an intro, if you have a verse, maybe a pre-chorus or a chorus, you will have either a designated riff for each of these little parts that you're switching between,
Okay.
or you may have ones that are shared. So for instance, that initial riff that was played at the beginning of the song in the intro, it makes a big return in the chorus. So you kind of got this
I see.
foreshadowing
Uh-huh.
of the overall idea.
Okay.
I think part of that, as we talked about before, is there's a little bit of boredom. We want some variety within the music. But I also think the reason why it isn't this large development is really just the amount of time that you have in most rock songs.
I see.
When you're limited to about 3.5 minutes, you really don't have the time to start to explore some of the possibilities within a single idea. You have to put it forward.
Especially because it seems to be serving as an accompaniment to what else is going on in the music. And so I'm thinking of, the sort of accompaniment patterns we would do on the piano or something to accompany a voice singing an art song. And there you don't look for the same sort of development as you might in a sonata or symphony, because it's a completely different setup.
Absolutely.
So it seems like with a lot of the rock music I've heard to date, it's more in the song and accompaniment style.
Definitely. Yeah, the guitar riff, and again, another way of kind of thinking about what this thing is and how do we identify it. To me, the idea of a riff is something that is intended as accompaniment. It's rhythm or support that is going to be used while another instrument within the group is taking that role of melody, whether that's the vocalist or maybe it's another instrument doing a solo. The riff is something that is supporting underneath and keeping the song moving forward and supporting things.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, there's another term, and I'm going to kind of switch gears with this.
Okay.
And I don't know whether this is one that's come up for you. So now looking at the idea of melody, or this lead guitar, the guitar solo, has the term of a guitar lick come up yet?
I guess not.
No. Okay. So this is almost the other side of the coin to we guitar players. A guitar lick is to the guitar solo what a guitar riff is to rhythm guitar playing. So a lick is an idea that is really intended to be used for melodic purposes. Just to give you an example of one, and this is one that we could refer to as a rock lick, or it could kind of fall under blues. We have melody. We have something that is really intended to sit above the rest of the music in some fashion. Okay? Now, what's different about the guitar lick, other than this idea of melody, is it's not necessarily intended, like the riff, to be repeated within the song over and over and over again exactly the same way that it was played before. There is definitely more of this attitude of variety, where we have different licks that are being brought in. You may also see with certain players a lot more development of ideas. So little variations may be played in an improvisational form, whether that's in a recording or definitely in a live setting, so that the musician has a chance to kind of express themselves within those ideas.
I see.
But there's definitely this idea of a collection of licks, these kind of pre-written, pre-learned and practiced ideas for lead playing that guitarists can fall back to, at least as a starting place.
Right. Okay. So going back to my world of composition and musical design, I guess that would be closer to a motif, but it's still not being developed in the way that I would speak of development, but it's being varied, kind of like a set of variations on an idea.
Definitely. Yeah, and within, again, the different forms of writing that we see for guitar, this is often a very spontaneous thing.
Okay.
You can certainly have situations where a piece is written out of a lick, where it's a hook, or it is maybe an iconic part that's being returned to within the piece. But usually the idea of a lick is something, again, that we place in a guitar solo.
I guess this is making me think a bit of the jazz piano type improvisatory stuff.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
In jazz,
I understand.
we might think of these as our lines or our vocabulary.
Right.
Right? These are pre-learned or maybe kind of lifted ideas from the literature, the greats that are out there, and they're really done in that style as a way to understand kind of how to approach playing over the music. How do jazz musicians construct their ideas?
Right.
There's a similarity to that in rock guitar, but there's certainly less of this kind of theoretical, academic, necessity, and it's more just out of the idea of, hey, that sounds really cool, right?
Okay.
There's more of that side of things. Hey, I like that. I'm going to take that. I'm going to do my own thing with it for sure.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yes,
that
go ahead.
that all makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think I'm understanding, and it's definitely a different approach than what I'm used to, but it makes sense in the context.
So what I wanted to mention on all of these different fronts for the electric guitar, and I think that this is a really important thing to understand about how the instrument itself has developed and how the playing of the instrument it has developed, is this is really rooted in live performance. You have musicians who are in a band, who are getting up on stage, who are creating and playing and developing their ideas for the audience. I think the thing about, especially when we're looking at lead guitar playing, it is this kind of infusion of energy into the music. At least that's what guitarists are trying to do. They're trying to kind of put out as much as they can to get the audience involved with what's going on.
See.
And so the style, the approach, the way we play has really grown out of that. It's not something where somebody took their instrument and went up into a tower in isolation and kind of came up with everything and came back and shared it with everybody. It was down, it was on the ground or on the stage, and growing out of this interaction with the audience.
I see. Okay. Interesting. Now, before we get too far away from
Sure.
the topic, because you mentioned earlier the different sound effects and qualities, I thought I would just mention I've heard a bunch in the
Yes.
music that I've listened to so far, and a lot of it doesn't really pull me in, but there have been a handful of sounds that really attracted me. And I guess one of them was when I listened to Brothers in Arms for the first time.
Okay.
I loved the way the guitar seemed to be functioning as an equal voice against the other voice. And I know that's a common blues jazz style, but I felt like in that song, They were equal partners in a very beautiful way, and I loved it. Another one was, I guess, when I listened to the Rammstein piece that I did, that was Ohne dich.
Okay.
Then there was a moment in the music where I don't know if it was the bass guitar, but it was a bass note, right? I call it bass because it's down there, and it functioned like something like an organ pedal, like bomb, and it was so awesome in that moment, and it worked so well
Yes.
from my musical perspective and my ability to enjoy it. It was just, and I think I remember somebody messaged me and said, "Are you starting to like these ugly sounds now?" And I wouldn't say that it was ugly in that moment. It was beautiful. It was really incredible. And then the most recent surprise I had, what was it? It was it was in one of the recent pieces I've listened to, and I was, I can't remember. They all run together in my head
Yes.
sometimes. But I was listening to the chorus, and I said, "Oh, he brought a horn in there. It sounded a bit like a French horn." And then a bunch of commenters said, I guess it was on the Van Halen piece. Van Halen, excuse me.
Yep.
A bunch of commenters were posting, "It's not good. It's not a horn, silly. It's not a horn. It's not a horn. It's the guitar." And I'm like,
Yes.
"Oh, okay. That's lovely." It was so ripe with color and expression in that moment. And so I guess those are the three highlights of my sonic experience with the guitar so far, where something surprised me or something just really satisfied me in the music coming from the guitar.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is something that is so wonderful about this journey that you're going through, is that you're going to encounter these things that you're not expecting, that you, of course, are not accustomed to, that are new and different, and how you end up reacting to them, of course, is a surprise to you. And this is why this is so wonderful, is getting to enjoy that with the audience, right?
Yeah.
But I think something important that you mentioned that stood out to me as you were describing that is something to keep in mind, and maybe for those audience members of yours who maybe likewise have their own preferences that they're coming from into rock music. And this is the idea of expression. When we talk about beauty, and we can spend hours or days discussing what is beauty, especially in music.
Right, of course.
What I try to do when I'm thinking about what I'm listening to is focus mostly on this idea of what is the expression, what is the emotion that is trying to be put forward. And when you think of it that way, not necessarily just as just beauty or what's beautiful or what's pleasant, this idea of expression, the range of human expression is just immense. And so when you get into some of these areas in expression that maybe are gritty or unpleasant or could be maybe very, very dark, that's when I think some of these elements in rock, the nasty, rough sound of an electric guitar, or the harsh, rough edge of, say, like a saw wave in a synthesizer. This is when these sounds, I think, really start to make sense. If you're trying to
and that's something Vlad has been telling me too.
Yes. So that, as I said, that's something I maybe want to leave you with as you continue this journey, is remember this, is it's not necessarily always about expressing the beautiful things. And sometimes it's really just expressing emotion in some form. And sometimes that is very, very, refined and beautiful and glorious. And sometimes it's down in the dirt and rough and nasty, and that, I think, really is just the human experience.
Right. And in that sense, we can say the guitar is a beautiful instrument for defining, for expressing the whole range of human
Absolutely.
experience.
Yes. You mentioned
Yeah.
this kind of singing voice from Brothers in
Uh-huh.
Arms. Yes, you have this. We sometimes think of the sustained, the kind of violin-like singing voice of the guitar. Yeah, absolutely, it can be beautiful. And then in a second, it flips over into this rough, nasty, monstrous thing.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and the contrast itself can be beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, that's great. And I enjoyed it so much. Um, I was wondering if, in wrapping up, would you be willing to play something for the audience? Maybe
Sure.
something that I don't know if you've followed all the pieces that I've listened to so far or not, but maybe just pick something you think that I would enjoy or benefit from and the audience might enjoy, and
Okay.
that'd be fun.
I don't know whether or not this is one that you've actually tipped into, but I'm going to play this because I know that if I don't play something from this band, that I'm going to get a very interesting talk to from Carl. So
Okay.
I'll leave an introduction for this. I will maybe after the fact kind of mention what this is. If this is a piece that you haven't done a listen through to, then I absolutely recommend it. Okay, so here we go.
Okay.
Does that ring any bells for you? Have you heard that before?
I can't say that I have. If I
Okay,
have,
that's all right.
I'm embarrassed to have forgotten it. But anyway.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. So that is the opening guitar kind of collection of riffs from the piece Limelight by Rush.
Okay, I haven't listened to any Rush yet.
Okay.
And I know a whole bunch of my audience is crying out for me to listen to Rush, and I will be getting to it. But
Well, I'm
that's
glad
what
that
I
they
haven't
are
heard.
doing that. Absolutely, yes. I think it would be a shame in this journey of yours that you don't eventually get to Rush and kind of listen to the contributions
I
that
will
they've
get to
made.
it.
Awesome. And again, of course, as a Canadian, I would be heartbroken if they weren't at least touched upon it sometime. For sure.
I promise, I'll visit the neighbors.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Graham, so much. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
No, not really so much. I want to thank you very much, Amy, for the opportunity and the invitation to do this conversation. I really do hope that your audience, that your followers, can get something out of this, whether or not this is new information to them, or if they've been into rock music and maybe haven't gone a little bit further behind the scenes of the electric guitar itself to learn a little bit more. I think, just as a final note, this is just the tip of the iceberg of
sure.
this world of the electric guitar.
I'm sure.
It runs very, very deep. And I think what's wonderful about this instrument as well too is there's something for everybody in it. Whether you are into rock music, if you like styles that are maybe more aggressive or less aggressive, there's something for everybody, and everybody can be involved if they choose to be, for sure.
That's great. Well, again, thank you. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed this. I feel like I've learned quite a bit. And I know I haven't learned everything by a long shot, but I'm always excited to discover a bit more and more and more. And I thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Amy.
All right.
All right.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.